Okay, continuing on with editing your or modeling your polygon meshes. We're going to learn how to use and manipulate this thing in the center called the 3D cursor and this little orange dot called the origin point. These are really important tools to be able to use to basically precisely move an object, rotate it along a certain kind of axis, change where certain objects are created, etc. It comes in handy, and it's a little bit mysterious at first when you start using it. So first thing we're going to play around with is the 3D cursor, which again is the red and white circle and cross. So you can change it automatically defaults to to the 0 axis point on X, Y, and Z in the viewport or the world. You can change its location very easily by holding down the Shift button and right-clicking somewhere on the viewport. So I'm right-clicking and changing where this axis is. I can go into, let's say, the top view by hitting 7 on the number pad, and I can bring it over here, or over here, or over here. You can go to another view and right-click and bring it over here, etc. Okay, so moving it to a different location does a couple of things. So one of the things that moving the 3D cursor to a new location does that if you create a new object now, select a new mesh, and let's make a new a torus. Well, the torus is going to be placed centered around the new location of this 3D cursor. Okay, and it is also its origin point is inside of it. So if I click on, so you see the separation between the origin point and the 3D cursor. So with this first sphere I made, the origin point of the sphere belonging to the sphere is inside the sphere in the center. The origin point of this torus is inside the torus, but that's also where the 3D cursor is. But the 3D cursor can move independently. So if I shift and right click over here, I'm just moving the cursor. The origin point for this object is in the center, the origin point for this object. Now we are going to get into changing the origin point as well in a moment, but just realize they're two different things. Okay, I'm going to delete this. Now I'm going to go in, so I've got this 3D cursor moved somewhere away from my object. I'm going to go into edit mode, tab, right? Click your object and then hit tab to go into edit mode. And you can actually move this 3D cursor to any particular vertex on an object. Now, we'll talk about why you might want to do that, but let's go into vertex mode, clicking 1 on your keyboard, or just selecting it up here. And I'm going to select this vertex right here. I'm going to grab it and move it. All right, so I've got this vertex that I've identified as the place where I want this to snap to. Right? And so if you right click on the object, you get this vertex context menu pops up. And if you scroll down to snap vertices, you can select cursor to selected. So you have to get your terminology right. This is the 3D cursor here. Okay, so right click, and it makes sense. I'm going to snap the cursor to the selected vertex. So cursor to selected. And voila, we've got the cursor linked to this particular vertex. Now, if I tab out of here and I create a new object, monkey. Well, the monkey is going to be attached, not attached, but it's going to be it's going to be located right. The center of this monkey is going to be located right at the center of that vertex. Okay, so if you were modeling something precisely, or you needed to have some things line up in a certain way, you would do that. All right, let's move on. So when you play around with moving your 3D cursor, let's delete these two objects, for instance. You find that, oh man, I moved this all to different places. I really want it to go back to the original place. The keyboard shortcut to return your 3D cursor back to the zero part is simply Shift-C, C on your keyboard. Very good, useful thing to have. You just kind of reset things, set it back to zero. Good. You can also, if you are in edit mode, you can do that in another way. Let's do this. Create a cube. And in edit mode, let's say I right-clicked this thing over here. You can right-click in edit mode and choose Cursor to World Origin. And that will also return it back to its original place. So again, if it's located somewhere strange, either Shift-C or right-click in edit mode, snap vertices, cursor to world origin. Two very helpful things there. All right, so another way to move your 3D cursor is, remember here in this, when you hit N on your keyboard, you open up this menu. If you go to the View tab, so you've got Item tab, Tool tab, View tab. If you go to the View tab, you actually have a numerical way of manipulating your 3D cursor. You can put 0, 0, 0, and change the rotation to 0, and you have returned it back to its original location. You can also move it numerically, and oops, let's see, what did I do there? Okay, you can move it numerically here by typing in a number. Let's say 1. Okay, I moved it over 1 on the x-axis, -2 in the y-axis, and 3 positive in the z-axis. And that's where it went. Okay, so lots of ways to move your 3D cursor. Shortcut to get it back to 0, Shift-C. Okay, continuing on, we're going to talk about the origin point, this little orange dot in the center of this model of Suzanne, the monkey. Okay, so the origin point determines where an object will scale, rotate, and transform from. The default origin point for any object is directly in the center of the object. So let's work on moving our origin point. It's a little bit of a two-step process. We move the 3D cursor and move the origin point to the 3D cursor. So we're going to build on what we know. So let's move the 3D cursor. Let's review. And let's select this vertex right there, left click, and remember to move the 3D cursor to that vertex. We're going to right click and say snap vertices, cursor to selected. Okay, now notice it moved the 3D cursor, but it didn't move the origin point. Okay, that's going to be step 2. Now, we're going to tab out of edit mode into object mode. And in object mode, we're going to right click on the object, and we're going to select set origin. So this is our origin point to the 3D cursor. Set origin, origin to 3D cursor. Aha. Okay, so 2 steps. First move the 3D cursor, then move the origin point. Okay, so all this in order to say why we do this is that now when we rotate, let's hit R And when we rotate the object, it is the origin point of the rotation is now at that vertex. It's no longer in the center, right? If it was in the center, it would rotate around in the center of the object, and now it's rotating here. Scale is a little bit less obvious. You know, it's still scaling uniformly, but it really can help if you want to pivot an object along a certain point. So it's very helpful for rotate, changing the origin point. Now, just be very clear, I'm going to shift and right click my cursor somewhere else. That has nothing to do with what we just did. We still moved the origin point up here. Again, if I rotate this, it's rotating off that origin point. It's not rotating off of the 3D cursor. So just try to separate those two things in your mind, understand how they work together and how they work separately. Okay, let's see what else. All right, to move the origin point back to the center of your object, you know, let's say we rotated this along this axis because we really wanted to manipulate it in that way. But our next manipulation we want to do, we want to make sure that it's back in the center. In object mode, right click and set the origin to the geometry. So origin to geometry, not geometry to origin. Okay, it's an interesting difference. We're going to set the origin to the geometry. Now we set the origin to the center of this geometry. Let's undo that for a moment. Right click and set geometry to origin. Hopefully you can guess what's going to happen. It's going to move the Suzanne head over here to the center of the where the origin was, right? Subtle difference. Let's go into another view to see that a little bit better. Okay, so in the first case, right click, set origin to geometry. The object is not going to move, but the origin goes to it. The other option, right click, set geometry to origin. In this case, the actual object moves into the center of the geometry, or in the center of the origin. All right, I know, there's a lot. Okay, the other thing to just look at is that when you hold down Shift S on your, if you hold those two things down, you get some of these things we've played with and some that we haven't played with, but they are similar. You can set the cursor to the grid, cursor back to world origin, cursor to the selected, selection to grid. So these are also ways to move the 3D origin into different places. Okay, good. I think that is it for this section.